I stood there on the curb with the plastic bag from the tourist gift shop still dangling from my wrist like a leash. I remember the exact t-shirt I was holding. A dumb novelty thing with, "I got lost in Breckenridge and all I got was this shirt," printed in crooked red letters. The irony didn't hit me until 2 days later, but the humiliation landed instantly. They drove off in the rented SUV, tires chirping like they were in some bad teen movie. My wife in the passenger seat, her phone out, probably recording my face. Her friends howling. One of them shouted, "Let's see if he can find his way home." And then they were gone. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even surprised. Not really. That kind of joke doesn't come from nowhere. It's planted, watered, and cultivated over years. Quiet eye rolls, slow sighs at parties, private group chats I was never in. They didn't just leave me behind. They delivered a punchline. I was the punchline. First, I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I thought maybe it was just some kind of morbid test. Like I was supposed to chase after them, call someone, grovel. That's what humiliation is, right? A performance? I looked around the sleepy downtown strip, tourists sipping coffee, a busker playing off-key Beatles, kids licking melted ice cream cones. The world didn't stop because my wife decided I was disposable. 1 hour in, I went into a diner and asked to borrow the phone. The teenage waitress handed it over, bored out of her skull. I called her, straight to voicemail, then again, and again. After the 5th call, I didn't leave a message. What was I going to say? "Hey sweetheart, just wondering if you abandoned me as a joke or as a prelude to a divorce." My hands shook, but not with rage. No, it was something worse. Something slower, colder. That evening, I tried the hotel. Of course they checked out. Left a note at the front desk with nothing on it except a smiley face and "he'll figure it out" winky face in my wife's handwriting. That's when something cracked. Not broke. Cracked, clean, deliberate. A sharp internal click. Like a vault door shutting. I'm sharing this because, believe it or not, more than 97% of the people who hear this kind of story never subscribe. But if you do, it tells the team behind the scenes to keep digging up these strange, personal, uncomfortable truths. Because some stories deserve to echo louder than others. I slept on a bench that night. I used my tourist t-shirt as a pillow and tried not to choke on the irony. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into the night. I just sat there, staring at the rental receipt sticking out of my pocket like a bookmark to a life that had just ended on page 50. At dawn I walked, not aimlessly, not like a lost puppy. I walked with the slow, numb realization that no one was coming to get me. Not the police, not a friend, not even her. That wasn't part of the script. The joke didn't have a rescue. The joke only worked if I stayed pathetic. If I showed up 3 days later, angry, hungry, wet, and beaten. But what happens when the punchline just doesn't land? When the clown refuses to perform? I passed a souvenir shop and caught my reflection in the window. Sweat-stained shirt, squinting eyes, and something else behind the gaze. Something dead but focused. And I realized, I could walk back into that life, or I could let it end right there. Right then, like a name scratched off a doorbell. That was the last time anyone called me by the name she knew. That was the last time I answered to it. I sold my wedding band that afternoon to a guy at a pawn shop who didn't ask questions. I used the cash to buy a map. A paper map. The kind no one uses anymore. Because I didn't want GPS. I didn't want digital footprints. I didn't want to be found. I bought a bus ticket heading north. Toward the mountains. Toward silence. Toward nobody. I didn't look back. Not once. The guy at the ticket booth asked if I needed a return ticket. I smiled and said, "No, just one way." The bench in the terminal wasn't built for sleep, but it didn't matter. You don't feel a metal bar pressing between your ribs when your entire nervous system is locked in some strange purgatory between betrayal and disbelief. The humming vending machines, the occasional buzz of a payphone, the quiet snoring of the guy 2 rows over. None of it registered. I laid there like discarded luggage, shoes off, wedding ring already gone. I kept turning one line over in my head. They laughed. That was the part that stuck. The laughter. Not just hers. All of them. I wasn't a man to them anymore. I was a prop in their little improv sketch. At some point around 4 a.m., a janitor nudged me with his mop and said, "You're gonna want to be out of here before the bus from Tulsa gets in. Those folks don't share benches." That was the first time I smiled since the curb. Small, crooked, hollow. I got up, stretched, and opened my wallet, only to remember again that it wasn't there. Right? No ID. No phone. No cards. Just the watch on my wrist. Stainless steel. A gift from her, ironically enough. Anniversary number 5. She'd had it engraved. To my rock. I popped the band open, scratched off the engraving with the edge of a key I still had in my pocket. Car key to a car I'd never see again. And walked 4 blocks to the pawn shop that opened at 6. The guy behind the glass didn't ask questions. Didn't even raise an eyebrow when I traded a decent wristwatch for a crumpled roll of 20s and a side glance. That was fine. I didn't need concern. I needed distance. I needed disconnection. I bought a road atlas at a gas station next door. I stood in the parking lot with the map spread out over the hood of someone's old Impala and ran my finger north. Not to a place I had family. Not to some cabin I'd secretly bought years ago. Just away. The kind of away where the air is thinner and names don't matter. Where silence isn't suspicious. My first ride was a plumber hauling parts in a rusted-out van that smelled like glue and old coffee. He didn't talk much. I liked that. I stared out the window and imagined my wife waking up, hair messy, smiling like she'd won something, probably telling her friends how hilarious it was that I freaked out and wandered off. Maybe they'd planned a second round of humiliation, catching me on some bus home, defeated, grateful for forgiveness. But the bus never came. The defeat never arrived. And forgiveness? No, that door was nailed shut. Over the next few days, I hitched rides across 3 state lines. I bathed in truck stops, ate out of vending machines. I didn't feel homeless. I felt transitional, like a snake mid-shed. I used a burner phone I bought from a convenience store to call 3 people. All of them from a life before her. People she never met, never liked me talking to. One of them owed me a favor. Another had a spare cabin. The third, well, she just didn't ask questions. That's all I needed. I told each of them the same 3 things. I am not dead. You will not contact me unless I contact you. I need time. Real time. Years. They didn't ask why. That was why I called them. I reached the cabin by the end of the week. No GPS. No address in a database. Just directions scribbled on the edge of a fast food napkin and a series of landmarks only locals would know. Turn right at the old water tower. If you hit the mailbox with a bare paw on it, you've gone too far. It was small, cold, bare. A one-room place with a fireplace, a cracked window, and a mattress that smelled like cedar and mildew. It was perfect. I collapsed onto the floor, not out of exhaustion but out of choice. The floor felt honest. And that's where I finally allowed the anger to come. But not in flames. Not in screams. Came like smoke. Thick, creeping, lingering. I wasn't going to get revenge. I wasn't going to show up at her office with some dramatic speech. This wasn't a movie. No big confrontation. No dramatic reveal. She wanted to reduce me to a joke. And instead I erased myself. Because here's what she never understood. Some men don't fight back with fists or yelling. Some men vanish. Not out of weakness but out of surgical precision. You don't win by getting even. You win by becoming someone who never needed her to begin with. I threw the road atlas into the fireplace. Watched the last page burn. Then I started writing a new name on the inside cover of a library book I found on the shelf. Just a first name. Something simple. Something quiet. From that point on, I wasn't him anymore. He died back on that sidewalk. And no one buried him. Because no one came looking. She pulled into our driveway around midnight, headlights brushing across the front porch where my boots usually sat after long days. They weren't there. The garbage cans were still at the curb. Mail untouched. Porch light off. That was her first clue. Not that I was missing, but that I wasn't sulking correctly. She expected theatrics. Maybe a drunken voicemail. Maybe some passive-aggressive silence. Topped off with a text saying, "You went too far." Instead, there was nothing. Not a sound. Not a note. Just the eerie stillness of a house that no longer had a pulse. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. My jacket still hung on the coat hook. The worn paperback I'd been halfway through lay open on the armrest, dog-eared at chapter 14. Even my coffee mug sat in the sink, a brown ring circling the bottom like a fingerprint of a life abruptly cut off. And still she laughed. "He's pouting," she told her friends on speakerphone. They were still high from the weekend, still riding the giddy afterglow of their little stunt. One of them joked, "Bet he's halfway to Vegas, sulking in a bar like a rom-com husband." They laughed, of course, because that's what they did, made everything small. My silence was just another opportunity for punchlines. But 2 days later, the air shifted. She texted me, then again, then 6 times in a row. No red receipts. She called my brother. Left a message pretending she was just checking in. He hadn't heard from me. She went through my closet. Noticed things were missing. Not everything. Just enough. Boots. Toiletries. The old duffel bag I hadn't touched in years. That's when her stomach dropped. Not because she was afraid for me, but because the joke might not be funny anymore. The following week, she filed a missing person report. Her tone at the station was light, forced casual. "It's probably nothing," she said, smiling too wide. "He's just dramatic. You know men." But she overplayed it. The officer leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers. "He left without his wallet, phone, or car?" She nodded, chuckling awkwardly. "It was just a girl's trip, and we kinda left him behind." As a joke. The officer didn't laugh. That was the beginning of her unraveling. When she got home, her texts had gone from playful to panicked. "Where are you? Please call me. This isn't funny. I'm worried." The last one read, "Just tell me you're okay." The group chat with her friends turned from memes to deletions. One by one, the comments and posts disappeared. The selfie where I was cropped out? Gone. The video of them laughing as they pulled away? Deleted. The internet forgets fast. But police screenshots don't. Especially when a missing persons case turns serious. The detective came back 2 days later. "We traced his last activity to a pawn shop in Colorado," he said. "After that, nothing. No credit card usage. No travel. No ID hits." She offered weak smiles and weaker excuses. "He's always been private. Maybe he just needed space." But even she didn't believe it. Her eyes darted to the floor. Her nails clicked nervously against the table. "He didn't take anything valuable," she mumbled. The officer raised an eyebrow. "That's the part you're focused on?" She began staying up late, pacing. The house got too quiet. Our dog, hers now, sat by the front door every evening, waiting. She started locking the doors at night, as if I was going to return like a ghost. She began to realize the magnitude of her gamble. When you play a prank on someone, the unspoken rule is, they'll come back. They'll laugh eventually. That's what made it safe. But what happens when they don't return? What happens when the humiliation you counted on boomerangs? She tried to contact my old friends. The ones she hadn't already driven off years ago. But most of them gave her nothing. One finally told her point blank. "He asked us to leave it alone. And honestly, you don't get to ask questions anymore." She cried after that. But not the kind of crying that comes from love. It was fear. Raw, creeping fear. Because even though she never said it out loud, she knew what I was capable of. Not in rage, but in control. I wasn't the kind of man who yells and slams doors. I was the kind who listens quietly, waits patiently, and then disappears completely. She tried to tell the police I was depressed. That maybe I'd done something drastic. "He didn't take anything. No ID. No money. He must be dead." Her voice cracked on that word. Dead. Tasted too final. Too honest. But the detective didn't nod. He just looked at her and said, "Or he planned it. Some people don't want to be found." And she knew then, deep in the marrow of her bones, that maybe I wasn't missing. Maybe I was gone on purpose. She called the private investigator 3 days after the detective stopped returning her voicemails. Not because the case was closed, no, it was still marked as active, but because you can hear it in someone's voice when they're no longer looking. When the reports go cold, when the polite updates become fewer and more mechanical, when the only thing they say is, "We'll let you know if something changes," you realize you've become your own search party. The PI was expensive. The kind of guy with a website that looked 10 years out of date and no social media presence. Which meant he was either a dinosaur or the real deal. She chose to believe the latter. His name was Ed. Just Ed. No last name offered, and she never asked. He had an office above a bakery and didn't make her fill out forms. Just listened. Stared. Jotted notes with a pen that clicked louder than it wrote. She gave him everything: photos, timestamps, names of friends, the message on the hotel front desk note. She tried to keep her voice calm. Rehearsed. "He's not dangerous. Just sensitive. He's done things like this before." Ed glanced up. Left without his phone and wallet before? She didn't respond. He scribbled something. 3 days later, he called her. "Got something." Surveillance footage from a gas station in western Kansas. I bought a bottle of water and a pack of sunflower seeds. Walked in wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. Paid in cash. No ID. Nothing traceable. But she recognized me instantly. Said she could see it in the way I walked, shoulders slightly forward, left arm swinging wider. The little habits wives memorize without knowing they're memorizing them. After that, nothing. No more sightings. No additional footage. No paper trail. No motel records. No pawn shop logs after the first one. Even the bus station where I'd slept had already recorded over their tapes. Ed did what he could. He pulled favors. Scanned DMV databases. Tried hospitals, even morgues. Nothing. It was like I had slipped between the cracks and evaporated. She started sitting up late again. Obsessing over maps. Drawing circles around counties and towns she didn't know existed until this. Cross-referencing timelines. Looking for patterns. But no matter how she cut the data, it didn't make sense. Because people don't just vanish, not unless they want to. Ed called her into his office after a week of silence. "I'm gonna be honest," he said, sipping lukewarm coffee. "This doesn't feel like a man who lost control. This feels like a man who never intended to come back." She tried to play dumb. "You think he planned this?" He shrugged. "You said he's quiet, private, maybe a little proud. The type that doesn't do messy. He didn't leave a trail because he knew what he was doing." She shook her head, too quickly. "No, you don't understand. He wouldn't do that to me." And Ed leaned back, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. "Are you sure about that?" That night, she sat in our old bedroom. Her bedroom now, really? And pulled open drawers looking for anything. Notes, journals, a clue. But there were no breadcrumbs. Only the cold realization that the man she lived with for 12 years had a level of detachment she never truly grasped. She always thought silence meant surrender. That quiet men broke under pressure. But what if silence was the strategy? She visited my parents, desperate enough to face their judgment. My father barely looked at her. My mother didn't invite her in. "We haven't seen him," she said, tone flat. "But I'm sure wherever he is, he's better off." She left in tears, called Ed again, demanded results. "Check everything again," she snapped. He wouldn't just disappear. And Ed said with a tired sigh, "You need to start considering that he did." So she offered a new theory. "Maybe I snapped. Maybe I had a mental break. He's never been good with stress," she told Ed, rewriting history in real time. "He's been fragile lately." But Ed wasn't buying it. He sold his watch, bought a map, took rides north, burned his digital trail. That's not fragile. That's precision. She hated that word. Precision. It meant intention. It meant I wasn't a victim of the prank. I was reacting to it like a surgeon with a scalpel. Calm. Exact. Deadly quiet. Days turned to weeks. It stopped calling. The police had moved on. Her friends stopped visiting. Too awkward. Too strange. The kind of story that makes people uncomfortable. Losing your husband to your own joke. She'd scroll through social media and see videos of women pranking their boyfriends. Hiding car keys. Abandoning them at the mall. Recording their meltdowns. The comments flooded in. "LOL, he's so dramatic. He'll get over it." Classic. But no one ever talked about what happens when the guy doesn't come back. When he doesn't forgive. When he doesn't play along. Because jokes have punchlines. But this joke had a ghost. The first year was survival. The second was adjustment. By the third, the noise in my head started to fade. By the fifth, there was no noise left at all. Just the sound of a hammer on wood and the wind that swept down the ridge in the evenings. Out here, names don't carry weight. They're just sounds you answer to until you stop. I became James because it was simple, forgettable. I liked how it sat in the mouth. Soft, unassuming. Not like my old name, which still felt like a collar around my neck even when no one was saying it. When you disappear on purpose, you expect paranoia to follow you like a shadow. You think you'll be looking over your shoulder, waiting for sirens or for some uniformed stranger to ask for papers. But that's not what happened. Out here, in a town with one grocery store and a gas pump that still clicks like it's 1987, nobody cares. They don't ask where you came from. They ask if you can help stack firewood before winter. They ask if you'll come to the pancake breakfast on Sunday. That's it. I took odd jobs at first. Hauling lumber, shoveling snow, patching roofs. Paid in cash. Slept on the floor of the cabin I rented from a guy named Walt who had eyes like a hawk but never pried. "You quiet?" he asked the first day. I nodded. "Good," he said. That was our whole lease agreement. The beard came without trying. One day I noticed it in the mirror. Thicker, grayer than I'd expected. It made me look like someone you wouldn't recognize in a lineup. Someone who could pass you in a grocery store and you'd never think twice. That was the point. I found a rhythm. Mornings in the workshop I built behind the cabin. Afternoons volunteering at the community center 2 towns over. They needed someone to fix shelves, paint walls, build things. I didn't talk much. Just worked. When the kids asked my name, I said James. They accepted it instantly. Kids don't need backstories. They only care if you show up when you say you will. Carpentry became more than a skill. It became a language. Each joint, each cut, each sanding stroke was a sentence. You can't rush it. You can't fake it. Wood tells on you if you lie. By the time I bought the land, 6 acres with a creek running through it, I'd built furniture for half the town. Paid in trade sometimes. They brought me jars of honey, smoked fish, quilts. My old life was credit cards and emails. This one was barter and calloused hands. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee and watched the sky turn violent with color before going black. There's a silence up here that isn't empty. It's full of things that don't announce themselves. Gulls, crickets, the creak of the porch boards settling under the cold. That silence started to feel like a friend. I kept my old wedding ring in a box under the floorboards. Not out of sentiment, but as a relic. A reminder of the man who stood on a sidewalk holding a souvenir bag while his wife laughed and drove away. That man was gone, but I didn't hate him. He was necessary. Without him, there's no James. People in town began to know me for small things. How I sharpened knives for the church kitchen. How I fixed Mrs. Halpern's porch steps without charging her. How I always brought extra gloves to the volunteer firewood drive. It wasn't penance. It wasn't some moral high ground. It was just a new way of existing. Less transactional. More deliberate. I even started teaching a class at the community center on weekends. Basic carpentry for teenagers. The first time I heard a kid call me Mr. James, I almost laughed. It sounded like a title I hadn't earned but wanted to. They didn't know they were helping me just as much as I was helping them. Teaching me how to be part of something without strings attached. I wasn't hiding from her anymore. I wasn't hiding from the police or from embarrassment. I was rebuilding from the foundation up, one nail at a time. Not revenge. Not escape. Transformation. At night, when the wind rattled the old windows and the stove hissed with pine logs, I'd sometimes picture her face. Not out of longing. Out of analysis. Wondering if she'd expected me to crawl back. Wondering if she ever realized the power she'd handed me by underestimating my quiet. I'd sip my coffee, look at the land I now owned outright, and think, this isn't a hiding place. This is a beginning. She wasn't even supposed to be in that town. It was a detour, one of those impulsive turns off the interstate you make when the playlist runs out and the silence gets too loud. She was driving alone, windows up, sipping a bitter gas station coffee and trying to make sense of how the last 14 years had hollowed her out in such exact, surgical ways. The divorce had come and gone. Clean on paper, messy in practice. Her second husband, Kevin, had called her too closed off, said she carried shadows like luggage. You never let anything go, he'd muttered. Right before leaving her for someone named Bree who did CrossFit and kept gratitude journals. She was heading nowhere in particular that day. Just away. From her empty condo, from her email inbox full of discount codes, from the echoing silence of being 52 with nothing to show for it but unread voicemails and a mailbox full of grocery store coupons. So she drove, landed in a mountain town where the air felt thinner and everything smelled like pine and sawdust. She pulled over to buy windshield wipers. The hardware store was cramped but clean. Bell jingled when she walked in. The clerk didn't look up. She wandered the aisles, not really knowing what she was looking for. Halfway through the paint section, she paused at the corkboard by the exit, cluttered with community events, lost cat posters, some handwritten ad for bear repellent. And then she saw it. Her breath caught so hard she almost dropped her coffee. Volunteer of the month, James W. There was a photo, grainy, printed on cheap inkjet paper. A man standing in front of a stack of lumber, arms crossed, beard full, eyes squinting slightly into the sun. The lines around his face had deepened. The hair had grayed and thinned. But it was him. It was him. She grabbed the paper like it might change in her hands. Her heart slammed into her chest like it was trying to escape her body. She read the tiny paragraph beneath the picture. James has been an irreplaceable part of our volunteer community, helping rebuild cabins, teach carpentry to youth, and support local housing projects. A true quiet hero. She whispered, "No, it can't be." But the words felt limp, empty, because it was. There was no doubt. The clerk glanced over. "You okay, ma'am?" She didn't answer, just folded the flyer carefully, too carefully, and slid it into her purse. Back in her car, she stared at the mountains. Her reflection in the glass was barely recognizable to herself, and not just from the lines or the makeup that no longer covered the years like it used to. It was the eyes. They looked haunted, hunted. All those years, she'd convinced herself he was dead. Or, if not dead, then something like it. Maybe institutionalized. Maybe sick. Maybe he'd snapped like she told the PI. She told herself that because it was easier than the truth. That he had chosen to disappear. That he had succeeded. Now, sitting in a parking lot in a town she didn't know the name of, she realized what terrified her most wasn't that he was alive. It was that he hadn't tried to contact her. Not once. No message. No letter. Not even a whisper. 14 years. And here he was. Rebuilt. Healthy. Smiling in the picture. Without her. Obsession bloomed like a sickness. She started Googling him immediately, but of course, James W. is the digital equivalent of a ghost name. Too vague. Too clean. No Facebook. No Instagram. She tried reverse image searching the photo. Nothing. No footprints. Just this one ink-smudged flyer from a dusty corkboard in a town with no signal. She drove slowly through the streets that afternoon, window half down, scanning every face like she was chasing a ghost. She passed the community center, the diner, a church with a fresh paint job. She didn't even know what she'd say if she found him. "Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you forgive me? Why didn't you call?" But deep down, she already knew the answer. Because forgiveness was never on the table. He hadn't disappeared in a storm of rage. He'd gone with intention, with clarity. He didn't get lost, he escaped. That night, she booked a room at a motel just outside town. Cracked lamp, scratchy sheets, heater that clicked like it had arthritis. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, the flyer folded neatly on the nightstand like a relic. She rehearsed introductions in her head. "It's me," sounded too obvious. "I thought you were dead," sounded too dramatic. Nothing fit. Because how do you approach someone who's already mourned you and moved on? And worse, what if you see them and they don't flinch, don't break, don't ask why you're there? What if you walk up to the man you discarded like a prank and he looks at you like you're the stranger? She stared at the ceiling until morning light cracked through the blinds and the truth settled in like cold smoke. If she went to find him now, she wasn't saving him from anything. She was only hoping to save herself. It was a Tuesday, overcast, the kind of mountain morning where the clouds hang low like they're eavesdropping. I was walking out of the chapel with a box of canned food cradled in my arms, donations for the shelter 3 towns over. Routine. Predictable. A rhythm I'd grown into like worn boots. I wasn't thinking about the past. I hadn't in years. Not consciously. That version of me, the one who once thought love could survive cruelty wrapped in laughter, had long since been folded away and buried under new habits, new rituals, a new name. I didn't hear her car. I didn't see her approach. But when I turned the corner toward my truck, I felt it. That strange gravitational pull of someone staring too hard for it to be casual. And there she was. 14 years. Time had softened her edges, but not erased them. She was thinner than I remembered. Hair lighter. Face more angular. But her posture? Still that same mixture of apology and defense. Like she wanted to be forgiven before she even spoke. "Daniel?" she whispered. My chest didn't clench. My heart didn't race. Nothing inside me moved. I just froze. Not from panic. From calculation. Like a carpenter measuring twice before the cut. I turned slowly. Not dramatically. Just enough to face her fully. Silence. Her eyes welled, mouth trembling with a million words that weren't worth saying. Then finally one escaped. "You survived." I nodded once. Set the box down on the truck's tailgate with careful, deliberate motion. My voice was low, controlled. Survival wasn't the hard part. She swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I thought, no one heard anything. The PI said you might have done something to yourself." "Of course he did," I said. It landed flat. Not cruel. Just real. I looked for you, she said. Her voice cracked. I came back that night. I thought you'd be waiting, furious. I thought you'd call me. You thought I'd play my part. I stared at her, not unkindly, but with a sort of clinical detachment. The sad husband who storms home for a confrontation, who forgives, who cries, who learns to laugh at the joke. She flinched like I'd struck her. I made a mistake, she whispered. Mistakes are tripping on a curb, I said. You orchestrated something rehearsed. You wanted an audience. You had an audience. She blinked fast. We didn't think you'd vanish. We thought you'd break. I offered. Come back crawling? Her silence was louder than any admission. You always underestimated silence, I said. You thought it meant weakness. But silence is strategy. Disappearance? That's a choice. She stepped closer. Can we just talk? We are. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her eyes darted to the chapel behind me. You work here? No, I replied. I help. That's different. She nodded, trying to make sense of the man in front of her. I could feel the disconnect vibrating off her, like she expected to see the broken version of me, begging for closure. Instead, she saw a man rebuilt. Not harder, just cleaner, less encumbered. You look different, she said. Good. She looked down at the ground. I didn't think you'd still be angry. I'm not. I said it simply, truthfully. And that's what unnerved her the most. Because when someone wrongs you, they expect rage. They know how to fight it. It gives them a script. What they don't know how to handle, what terrifies them, is when you're just done. No fury, no performance, just finished. You were gone, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Like you died. I did. She blinked, stunned. The man you left on that sidewalk? I said. He's gone. You buried him. I just took care of the headstone. She stepped back, like she needed physical distance to catch her breath. I picked the box back up. This place needs supplies. There's a storm coming tomorrow. She didn't respond, just stood there, arms limp at her sides, like she'd forgotten how to hold herself. I don't hate you, I added, my voice softer than before. That part was true. But I didn't miss her either. That's what broke her. She tried one last time. Can I see you again? I paused, looked her over once, top to bottom, not with desire or bitterness, but with the quiet finality of someone recognizing an artifact, a remnant. And I said, you just did. Then I turned, walked to the truck, and drove off. I didn't check the mirror. She asked to meet again. This time, I chose the place. An old diner just outside town with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I picked it because it was public but quiet, familiar to me but not to her. I knew the waitress, too. Linda. Kind, no questions. She'd slide us water and walk away, no hovering. I arrived early, sat by the window. She showed up late. Of course she did. Always did back then. As if her time was more expensive than everyone else's. But she walked in different now. Not with confidence. With caution. Like someone afraid the floor might drop out from under her again. She slid into the booth across from me. Didn't order anything. Just clutched her purse like it contained a parachute. I still can't believe it, she said. Her eyes scanned my face like she was trying to find the man she once knew beneath the beard, the age, the silence. I thought I'd buried you in my head 100 times. You did, I said. She flinched. I told myself you'd call, she whispered. That you were just angry, that you needed space. But as the months passed, she wiped her eye. We didn't mean to hurt you. That line landed like a cracked plate on linoleum. We didn't mean. Yes, the timeless coward's lullaby. Meant to soften impact, to deflect responsibility. Like a surgeon claiming the patient's bleeding out wasn't intentional. I didn't say a word. I was stupid, she said. Immature. We thought it would be funny. We really believed you'd come storming in 2 days later with some big dramatic speech and what? I asked, finally speaking. My voice was flat, neutral. Forgive you. She looked down. I don't know. I guess I didn't think. No, I said. You did. You just didn't think I would act. Linda brought us water, set it down and gave me a quick glance. A soft one. Then walked off. She never looked at the woman across from me. Somehow I think she knew. I reached into my coat and pulled out an envelope. Thick one. Cream-colored. Heavy stock. handed it across the table. She hesitated before taking it. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized immediately. Mine. What is this? Read it. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside were 8 pages. Typed, dated, numbered. It was a full list of every account we ever shared. Bank accounts, utilities, insurance, joint subscriptions, retirement, investment. Each line showed the date she was removed, the method of removal, and where the assets were rerouted. All within 6 weeks of the prank. She flipped to the final page, a notarized document. A severance of power of attorney, medical proxy, and emergency contacts. All signed. All legal. All executed without her knowledge. Why? She whispered, the word thin and hollow. I took a sip of water. Because a man without dignity is already dead. She dropped the envelope like it burned. I didn't think you'd. I didn't know you could. Plan. I offered. She stared at me, horror creeping in behind her eyes. You planned all this after I left you on that sidewalk? No, I said calmly. I planned it long before. The moment I realized you laughed at me more than you loved me. Her face crumbled. And for the first time, it wasn't performance. It wasn't manipulation. It was the raw collapse of someone realizing they'd been outmaneuvered not out of malice, but out of mercy withheld. You removed me from everything, she said. Like I never existed. I nodded. That's the thing about dignity. Once you reclaim it, you don't negotiate it. Tears streamed down her face now. The kind of tears that don't ask for comfort. They just fall helplessly. I leaned forward slightly. You wanted me humiliated. A joke. Something to be laughed at for years to come over wine and brunch and inside jokes. Instead, I disappeared. And now you're sitting across from someone you can't touch. Can't guilt. Can't drag back. Her voice was a whisper. You didn't even yell. Why would I? You expected noise. I gave you silence. Silence is harder to explain to your friends. She looked at the envelope again. 8 pages. Cold. Final. Not revenge. Just accounting. I'm sorry, she said. But it came out like a reflex, not a confession. I nodded slowly. I believe you. And I did. But it didn't matter. Forgiveness is not always reconciliation. Sometimes it's just a closed door that no longer needs to be locked. The check came. Linda placed it near me. I took it. Paid in cash. As we stood to leave, she touched my sleeve. Can I call you? I looked at her hand. Then at her. No. And I walked out. It started with a guy named Rick who ran a podcast out of the back room of a bakery. Small town stuff. Nothing flashy. Just him, a microphone, and a rotating cast of locals sharing stories about faith, loss, weird mountain sightings, and what it means to vanish in a world that tracks everything. Rick and I crossed paths at the community center. He dropped off a load of bread for the pantry and we got to talking. I was helping repair a busted shelf. He asked how long I'd been in town. I shrugged. Long enough. Maybe it was the way I said it. Maybe it was something in my voice. Either way, he asked if I'd ever be interested in coming on his podcast. Anonymous, if you want. We've been doing a series called Ghosts in Plain Sight. People who walked away from something. Figured you might have a story like that. I agreed. Not out of vanity. Not out of some desire to be heard. But because, for the first time in 14 years, it felt like I could share the truth without giving anything away. No names. No cities. No faces. Just silence finally allowed to speak. We recorded in one take. No edits. I told the story. Not the scandalous version. Not the revenge fantasy version. Just the facts. A man, betrayed by those who were supposed to love him, finds himself abandoned in a city without his wallet, his phone, or his dignity. So he walks, and walks, until he becomes someone else. Until he's not missing, he's just gone. I think some men don't explode, I said near the end. They dissolve, quietly, like ink in water. And when you stop looking for them, when you finally forget, they reassemble. From the ashes. Not bitter. Just better. Rick leaned into the mic. Do you think you'll ever go back? No, I said. Because there's nothing to go back to. It aired the next week. On a Tuesday. By Friday, it had 300,000 plays. By Sunday, 1 million. Turns out, stories like mine don't need drama to spread. They need truth. And this one hit something raw in people, men especially. Men who had swallowed decades of humiliation with a polite smile. Who had been the butt of jokes. dismissed in silence, told to lighten up when they were being disrespected in public. The episode gave shape to a quiet ache they hadn't known how to name. The comments section went feral. She did what? Dumped him like luggage and laughed? She's a monster. I hope he never gave her another second. And then, this sounds like my dad's story. This is why my brother disappeared. Men don't always break. Sometimes they escape. I stayed anonymous, of course. But she knew. She knew. Because the moment the episode crossed 500,000 streams, her phone started buzzing again. But this time, not with sympathy. Sponsors dropped her. The wellness brand that had her on their promo list? Gone. The women's speaker series she'd pitched herself to 3 months prior? Rejected with a 2-line email. We've decided to go in another direction. Even the yoga studio she'd helped open last year removed her photo from the website. No explanation. Just gone. She tried to fight it, of course. He didn't name me. He didn't even describe me. But it didn't matter. The internet doesn't need specifics to judge. It needs emotion. And my story, quiet, cold, undramatic, was full of it. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about every man who'd ever swallowed his pride and vanished quietly into a life no one understood. It was about every cruel prank that was brushed off as just a joke. It was about every silent walk away from a dinner table where someone laughed a little too loudly at your expense. And worst of all, for her, it wasn't a smear campaign. It was a reckoning she couldn't fight because I never raised a weapon. No names. No accusations. No lawsuits. Just a voice in a microphone, telling the truth. The backlash wasn't instant, but it was cumulative. Like mold creeping under drywall. One endorsement pulled here. One event canceled there. A sudden chill in her social circle. Former friends ghosting her without confrontation. Not because they believed my story necessarily, but because they suddenly remembered hers and didn't want to be associated with it. She tried to reclaim the narrative. Posted a vague caption on Instagram. Sometimes people twist stories to heal their own wounds. I forgive them anyway. It got 8 likes, 2 of them from bots. She tried to do a podcast of her own. Her side of the story. It lasted 2 episodes before being flooded with angry comments. She tried contacting Rick. He didn't respond, because he never knew her name. She started to unravel again. But this time there was no audience to perform for. No brunch table to mock me at. No friends to call me sensitive behind my back. Just a woman, alone, watching the internet burn down the very version of me she once laughed out of existence. And me? I was up on the ridge, sawing timber for the new storage shed behind the community center. Someone walked by that day and said, "Hey James, heard a podcast the other day that reminded me of you." I smiled. "Yeah." They nodded. "Guy had a good voice." I said nothing, just got back to work. The calls started 3 days after the episode hit 2 million plays. Unknown number, then known again, then again. I never blocked her. I didn't need to. There's a kind of silence more brutal than rejection, when your words vanish into the void and nothing comes back. I let the phone ring, every time, just once or twice at first, then a dozen times a day, then 20. By day 5 it hit triple digits. 112 calls. No voicemails, no texts, just the phone lighting up, vibrating briefly, and dying again in the cradle of the nightstand drawer I never opened. The town had gone quiet again, the podcast wave settling like dust after a storm. No one brought it up. No one probed. It wasn't politeness, it was understanding. A kind of unspoken respect people in small towns learn early. When someone tells their story without names, it means they've earned the right to be left alone. Then she came. I knew the moment the tires crunched the gravel near the tree line. was a rental car, soulless and silent, like she needed something with no fingerprints. I didn't look out the window, just listened as the door opened, closed, as cautious steps approached the porch. Then the knock. Not loud, not urgent, just hopeful. I waited 30 seconds, then opened it. She stood there, wrapped in an oversized sweater, hair pinned but unraveling at the edges. No makeup, the kind of look someone wears when they've spent hours preparing and still end up looking like someone they barely recognize. Her eyes met mine. She didn't speak right away, just took me in, slowly, like she was afraid the image would collapse if she blinked too hard. Then, I never knew I could lose someone like that. Her voice was wrecked, not raspy from crying, but dry from silence. The kind that comes after you've talked to yourself for hours in a car, rehearsing a speech you'll never give properly. I stepped outside, didn't rush, didn't cross my arms, just stood there, still. Then I said it. 2 words. You did. She staggered back a fraction of an inch, like the words were wind, and she'd forgotten how to brace herself. Her mouth opened slightly. Nothing came out. Her chest rose, fell. Again. Then came the sound. Not sobbing. Not screaming. Something quieter. Raw. A sound you only hear when someone's soul realizes it's been exiled from a place it thought it would always have access to. She didn't fall. She didn't run. She just stood there, stripped of the last illusion that she could somehow rewind it all with a confession, an apology, or an explanation that finally made sense. I didn't gloat. I didn't comfort. That was never the point. The point was silence. The kind of silence that becomes a mirror. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded paper. In case you ever. I didn't take it. She nodded, eyes red now, shoulders shaking. She set it on the wooden step beside her. I'm sorry, she whispered again, but this time it wasn't a plea. It was a eulogy. I stepped back into the cabin, closed the door. Not hard, not fast, just closed it. The sound of it echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. Not because it was angry, but because it was final. The paper stayed there on the step. I didn't pick it up. I let the wind have it,